My name is Kofi, and before I learned the master's tongue, the first language I truly understood was the rhythm of the lash. It was a harsh, sharp beat that punctuated the long, droning hum of the Maryland tobacco fields, a rhythm that promised pain, that spoke of power, and that we, the enslaved, were forced to dance to every single day. But there was another rhythm, a secret one that lived inside me. It was the rhythm my father, a bhikkhu, carried with him from the shores of Africa. He was a man with hands as wide as palm leaves and a memory that held oceans. He'd tap it out on the sides of a wooden bucket when the overseer wasn't looking, a complex, joyful beat that spoke of sun, of kings, of a life I could only dream of. He called it the heart drum. Those secret lessons, the tapping of his calloused fingers against wood, were the only inheritance he could give me before he was sold south. I was 7. I never saw him again. My world was the Bennett plantation, a sprawling expanse of green tobacco leaves under a sky that often felt too big and too blue for the misery it looked down upon. My mother, Ya, was a house servant. Her hands, unlike my father's, were deft and gentle, but her eyes held a storm of sorrow that never broke. She moved through the great house like a ghost, silent and efficient, her presence tolerated as long as it was invisible. My sister, Amara, younger by 2 years, was with me in the fields. Her spirit was brighter than mine, a small, stubborn flame that refused to be extinguished by the daily toil. We were a fractured family, held together by whispers in the dark and the shared memory of my father's heart drum. I grew up learning the two faces of our world. There was the one Master Bennett and his overseer, Mr. Davies, wanted us to see. A world of order, of work and reward, of a benevolent God who ordained their station and ours. Davies, a man with a perpetually sunburnt neck and eyes as pale and cold as a winter morning, was the enforcer of this order. He walked the rows with his whip coiled at his hip, a serpent waiting to strike. He didn't need to use it often. The threat of it, the memory of its song was enough to keep the pace. But then there was the real world, the one that came alive after the sun bled out of the sky. It was a world of hushed stories told in the cabins, of ancient songs hummed low, of herbal remedies Ya learned from her own mother. It was in this world that I first heard the whispers of a real night revolt, one that had happened years ago in Virginia, led by a man named Nat Turner. The masters spoke of it with fear, their voices tight and low. We spoke of it with a dangerous, secret awe. It was a seed of possibility planted in the barren soil of our lives. We heard tales, passed from traveler to traveler, of how nearly 50 freed slaves had tasted freedom, even if only for a few days. The idea was intoxicating. A revolt, freedom. The words themselves were a form of resistance. My awakening, the moment the world fractured for me, didn't come from a whip or a sail. It came from a song. Amara was 10, her hands already calloused and cut from the tobacco leaves. One afternoon as we worked, she started humming a tune. It wasn't one of our spirituals. It was a light, airy melody she'd heard the master's daughter sing. It was innocent, but Davies heard it. He stopped, his shadow falling over her small frame. "What's that you're singing, girl?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft. Amara froze. "Nothing, sir. Just a tune." "That ain't your tune," Davies hissed. "You don't get tunes, you get work." He uncoiled his whip. I stepped forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Sir," she meant no harm. Davies turned his cold eyes on me. "You stay out of this, boy." He raised the whip, and I saw the look in Amara's eyes, the bright flame of her spirit flickering, about to be snuffed out. In that moment, I understood. It wasn't about the song. It wasn't about disrespect. It was about possession. Our voices, our songs, our joy, our very thoughts. They believed they owned it all. He didn't strike her. He just held the whip there, a breath away from her face, until tears streamed down her cheeks. He let the terror do the work. That night, I couldn't sleep. The injustice of it burned in my gut like a hot coal. I crept out of our cabin to the edge of the woods where my father used to take me. I found 2 sturdy branches and a fallen log. My hands, remembering the movements my father had taught me, began to tap, softly at first, then with more force. I wasn't just hitting wood, I was speaking. I was channeling all my rage, my sorrow, my yearning for a life where my sister could sing any song she pleased. I played the heart drum, I played the rhythm of the lash, mocking it, twisting it. And then I played a new rhythm, one of my own making, a fast, urgent, defiant beat. It was the sound of a heart refusing to be silenced. It was the sound of my own private revolt. I knew with a certainty that shook me to my core that these forbidden drums of my ancestors were more than just a memory. They were a weapon, and one day I would use them to answer the whispers of a night revolt and see my people freed. The years that followed that night in the woods were a quiet war. On the surface, I was a compliant field hand, strong-backed and silent. I learned to wear a mask of dull obedience, to let my eyes go vacant when Davies or the master looked my way. But beneath the mask, a fire was being stoked. My resistance started small, almost imperceptible, a hoe blade accidentally striking a rock and dulling its edge, a bundle of tobacco leaves tied just a little too loosely, causing delays. These were tiny acts of sabotage, grains of sand in the gears of the great machine, but they were mine. They were my secret way of taking back a piece of my time, my labor. My real education began with old Samuel, a man whose back was bent into a permanent question mark from a lifetime of toil, but whose mind was as sharp as a new blade. Samuel had been a preacher of sorts in his youth. He had a tattered, coverless Bible that he kept hidden in the dirt floor of his cabin. He couldn't read most of it, but he knew the shapes of certain words: God, freedom, Moses, Egypt. He saw the hunger in my eyes and decided to take a risk. "The letters are a code, Kofi," he'd whisper, his finger tracing a symbol in the dust. "Master thinks he's the only one who can read it, but the good Lord left it for all his children." He taught me the letters, one by one. A, B, C. It was a slow, arduous process. We'd meet in the dead of night, practicing by the faint light of a stolen candle stub. The first word I learned to write, scratching it into the earth with a stick, was free. Seeing it there, a word I had formed myself, was like watching a star being born. With this new knowledge, the world began to open up. I started to see words everywhere, on discarded newspapers the master used for kindling, on the branding of a flour barrel, on the spine of a book in the great house library. I glimpsed through an open door. Each word was a piece of a map to a world beyond the Bennett plantation. It was through these scraps of text, pieced together with the hushed stories of travelers, that I first truly understood the Underground Railroad. It wasn't a real railroad, of course. It was a network of secret routes and safe houses, a river of hope flowing north. I learned about conductors who guided the passengers. I heard the name Harriet Tubman spoken in fearful, reverent whispers, a woman they called Moses, who had been born not 20 miles from our plantation and had gone back again and again to lead her people to freedom. The thought of her, a woman, defying the entire system was a revelation. It made the impossible seem possible. My secret drumming continued evolving. It was no longer just an outlet for my anger. It became a tool. I developed a system of rhythmic codes. A certain beat tapped on a fence post meant Davies was coming. A different rhythm, a low thrumming with my foot on the floorboards of the cabin, could signal a secret meeting. The music of the hunt drums became our invisible language, a way to communicate right under the noses of our captors. My friends, a small, trusted circle including a strong-willed man named Marcus and a quiet, observant woman named Sarah, learned to listen. One day, a new family was brought to the plantation, purchased from a bankrupt estate in Virginia. They were broken. the father staring into nothing, the mother weeping silently, their two children clinging to her legs. They had been separated from their eldest son at the auction block. Watching them, I felt the old rage return, but this time it was cold and sharp. I saw my own fractured family in them. That evening, I heard the story of their previous plantation. How a brave group had planned a mass escape, a night revolt aiming to free their entire community. The plan had been discovered, betrayed. The consequences were horrific, but the story also contained a detail that made my blood run cold and hot at the same time. A rumor that on a different plantation, a similar plan had succeeded, and nearly the 50 freed slaves had made it north. The story was a warning and a promise. Resistance was dangerous, but it was also happening. Freedom wasn't a myth, it was a destination, and there were paths to get there. That night, I didn't just play the drums for myself. I gathered Marcus and Sarah. In the deep dark of the woods, I laid out my idea. Not small acts of sabotage anymore. Something bigger. Something that could break chains for good. I told them about the railroad, about Harriet, about the possibility of the North. I told them that my skill with rhythm, with the code of the drums, could be our guide. It could be the key to planning our own escape, our own revolt. We wouldn't be attacking the great house with fire and fury like in the stories of Nat Turner. Our weapon would be silence, stealth, and the secret language of the drum. My special skill, the one inherited from my father, was no longer just about remembering Africa. It was about creating a future. It was the rhythm of liberation. The decision was made. We would not wait for freedom to be given. We would seize it. But hope without a plan is a dangerous fire, quickly extinguished. The next year was spent in the shadows, planning, observing, and preparing. My mind became a map, not of words on paper, but of sounds, sights, and rhythms. Every day, as I toiled in the fields, I was secretly surveying. I memorized the patrol patterns of Mr. Davies and the other overseers. I learned their habits, how Davies always started his rounds at the easternmost field, how the night watchman, a poor white farmer named Miller, would often doze off near the stables around 2 in the morning, his snores a soft, predictable rhythm. I walked the perimeter of the plantation under the guise of foraging or checking traps. I noted every landmark, the ancient, lightning-scarred oak, the shallow point in the creek, the dense thicket of blackberry bushes that could provide cover. Each landmark became a note in a song, a rhythmic phrase in my head. The journey to the creek was a slow, steady 4-beat pattern. The path through the woods was a syncopated, tricky rhythm to signify the uneven ground. This song map was something that could be taught, shared, and memorized without a single scrap of incriminating paper. It was a map no one could take from us. Identifying allies was the most perilous task. Trust was a currency more valuable than gold and just as rare. My core group was small. Marcus, whose strength was matched only by his loyalty, Sarah, whose quiet nature hid a keen eye for detail, and her husband, James, a blacksmith who could accidentally weaken a chain link or misplace a set of tools. We began to subtly test others. We'd drop a coded phrase from a spiritual, wade-in-the-water children and watch their eyes. A flicker of understanding, a subtle nod, was an invitation to a later, more secretive conversation. We built a network of about 50 souls, men and women who were willing to risk everything. The dream of 50 freed slaves was no longer a distant rumor. It was our goal, our number, our covenant. Our most significant potential ally from the outside was a Quaker man, Mr. Elias Penn. He came to the plantation a few times a year to buy tobacco, and unlike the others, his eyes held no cruelty. They held a deep, profound sadness. The Quakers, we knew from whispers, were abolitionists. But were they willing to break the law? One afternoon, while loading barrels onto his wagon, I tripped, sending a barrel crashing to the ground. As Mr. Penn helped me up, I looked him in the eye and hummed a few bars of "Follow the Drinking Gourd," the song that pointed the way north. His eyes widened just for a second. He said nothing, but as he left, he pressed a small, heavy coin into my palm. On one side was the North Star. It was a sign. He was a friend. He was a station on the railroad. We began to gather provisions in secret. Sarah and the other women would skim a little flour here, a little dried meat there, hiding it in hollowed-out logs or buried beneath cabin floors. James worked on acquiring tools, a file, a heavy iron bar. My role was to be the conductor, the strategist, the keeper of the rhythm. I taught them the song map. We practiced the codes. A slow, steady beat on the cabin walls, mimicking a heartbeat. All is calm. A rapid, frantic tapping like a woodpecker. Danger, hide. The plan was to stage a mass escape, our own night revolt, under the cover of the new moon. We would use the resonant sounds of the large water, drums, and barrels near the washing area as the signal, a deep, booming rhythm that would carry across the cabins, my call to assembly. The greatest torment, the question that haunted my every waking moment, was my family. My mother, Ya, was older now, her movements slower. The journey would be too hard for her. And Amara, she was now a young woman, and Davis's cold eyes lingered on her more and more. The thought of leaving them behind was a physical pain, a blade twisting in my gut. How could I seek my own freedom while leaving them in bondage? I confessed my turmoil to my mother one night, the words catching in my throat. She listened, her face unreadable in the dim light. When I finished, she took my hand. Her palm was dry and warm. "Kofi," she said, her voice soft but strong as iron. "Your father gave you the heart drum, but a drum is not meant to be kept in a box. It's meant to be played so the whole world can hear. You have his spirit, you have his fire. If you can get free, a piece of me and your sister gets free with you. You must go. You must run for all of us." She then pressed something into my hand. It was a small, smooth stone, dark and cool. He gave this to me before they took him. He said it holds the memory of the ocean. Now it's yours. Go north, Kofi. Go and don't look back. Her blessing was both a gift and a burden. I had her permission, but it did not quiet the ache in my soul. I was planning to free 50 people, but the two that mattered most would not be among them. The price of freedom was already proving to be impossibly high. The night of the new moon arrived, cloaked in a thick, starless dark that felt like a blessing. A humid stillness hung in the air, broken only by the chirping of crickets. My heart hammered a rhythm faster than any I could play. 50 souls were counting on me, 50 lives balanced on the edge of a drumbeat. We had planned for months. Every detail was memorized, every contingency considered, or so we thought. The plan was simple. At 2 in the morning, when the night watchman Miller was deepest in his slumber, I would creep to the large rain barrels, our makeshift drums, and sound the signal. A deep, rolling rhythm, the sound of a distant, gathering storm. It was the call to assemble at the lightning-scarred oak. From there we would move as one, following my song map to the creek and beyond, toward the first safe house arranged by Mr. Penn. I moved through the darkness like a phantom, my bare feet making no sound on the packed earth. I reached the barrels, my hands trembling as I raised them. I took a deep breath and began to play. The low boom echoed through the silent plantation. It was the sound of hope. It was the sound of our night revolt beginning. For a moment, there was only silence. Then shadows began to detach themselves from the cabins, moving swiftly and silently toward the woods. My heart swelled. It was working. We were doing it. But then a dog barked, not a lazy, sleepy bark, but a sharp, frantic one. Then another. Lights flared to life in the overseer's house. A shout cut through the night. "They're running!" Panic erupted. The silent, orderly retreat dissolved into a desperate scramble. People ran in every direction, the song map forgotten in their terror. I saw Marcus trying to rally a small group, his voice a low growl of command, but it was no use. The hunt was on. Davies was out of his house in moments, a rifle in one hand and his whip in the other. The sounds of men yelling, dogs baying, and the screams of the court filled the air. My grand plan to see white 50 freed slaves had turned into a nightmare of chaos and capture. I knew I had to run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. I saw Sarah and James being dragged back toward the main yard, their faces streaked with dirt and despair. I saw others fall, tangled in the darkness. The beautiful rhythm of my drum had summoned not freedom but failure. I finally broke and ran, not towards the north, but deeper into the woods, the sounds of my failure chasing me. I hid in a hollow log, my body shaking uncontrollably, until the false dawn painted the sky in shades of grey. The consequences were swift and brutal. The next day, we were all forced to gather in the main yard. Davies stood before us, his face a mask of cold fury. 20 people had been captured. The rest of us who had remained hidden or in our cabins were treated with equal suspicion. The master, Mr. Bennett, made a speech about betrayal and ungratefulness, but his words were empty. The real message was delivered by Davies's whip. He made an example of one of the captured men, a man named Levi. I will not describe the sounds or the sight of the blood that soaked the ground. It was not a spectacle for entertainment. It was a lesson in terror, a calculated act of psychological warfare designed to shred any remaining hope from our souls. The memory of it is a scar on my mind that will never fade. We were put on half rations. Our small privileges, the right to gather, the extra hour on Sunday, were revoked. A new, more vigilant watchman was hired. The air on the plantation grew thick and heavy with fear and suspicion. I was not flogged, as no one knew I was the leader, but I carried the guilt of Levi's punishment and the failure of our escape like a physical weight. For weeks, I was a ghost. I worked, I ate, I slept, but my spirit was gone. The heart drum within me was silent. Marcus, who had also escaped capture, found me one night by the creek. "This ain't on you, Kofi," he said, his voice rough with emotion. The plan was good. The risk was known. "It was my signal," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "My drum. I led them into a trap." "No," he said, grabbing my shoulder. "You led them toward hope. That's more than anyone else has ever done. We failed. We learn. We try again. You think Harriet Tubman never failed? You think she never lost someone?" His words were a splash of cold water on my face. He was right. To give up now would be to dishonor the sacrifice of those who were punished, to let Davies and the master win completely. My determination, buried under a mountain of guilt, began to stir. The community, though terrified, did not shun me. In their eyes I saw not blame, but a shared sorrow and a flicker of a question: what next? The revolt had failed, but the resistance was not over. The rhythm was not dead. It was merely waiting for a new beat. The winter that followed our failed escape was one of the bleakest of my life. The whip had done its work, seeding distrust among us. Neighbors eyed each other with suspicion. Was the man you shared a crust of bread with the one who would sell you out for an extra ration? The silence in the cabins was heavier than any chains. Yet, in this suffocating atmosphere, new and stronger alliances were forged. The 20 who were captured and the many more who ran had created a new hierarchy, those who had dared. We were marked, not by the whip, but by the shared experience of that terrifying night. We had seen the door to freedom, even if it had been slammed in our faces. Support came from unexpected corners. One evening, my mother brought me a small package. Inside was a piece of salted pork and a small loaf of cornbread. "From the kitchen," she whispered. "Mrs. Bennett is angry. She blames the overseer for the unrest, says he's too brutal and it makes us unproductive." It was a small thing, but it was a crack in the monolith of the great house. More importantly, the network of the Underground Railroad had not forgotten us. A traveling preacher, a free black man from Baltimore, came to our plantation. He spoke to us of Job and suffering, but his real message was in the hymns he chose. Steal Away to Jesus was not just a song about the afterlife. It was a signal that a conductor was near, that another chance was coming. He sought me out. Under the cover of a prayer meeting, he told me that Mr. Penn, the Quaker, was still willing to help. He had a new route planned, one that bypassed the now heavily patrolled roads, but he would only take a small group. A mass escape like the night revolt we had attempted was too risky. The dream of freeing Tyse's 50 freed slaves at once had to be abandoned for a more pragmatic goal, freeing a few who could then help free others. This new plan required absolute secrecy. My group was smaller now, just me, Marcus, Sarah, and James. We were hardened, more cautious. But the serpent of betrayal was coiled even within our small circle. There was a man, Daniel, who had been part of the original plan. He was a quiet, gentle man who loved his wife, Esther, more than life itself. After the failed escape, Esther had fallen ill with a lung fever, and her cough grew worse with each passing week. The master had promised Daniel that if he was helpful, he could get Esther moved to the infirmary, where she might get better care. Helpful meant being the master's eyes and ears. We didn't know this at first. Daniel was our friend. He attended our secret meetings, his face etched with worry. We planned our new escape, not with the loud signal of the just drums, but with a silent sign, a blue cloth tied to a specific branch on the path to the woods. It was James who grew suspicious. He noticed Daniel talking to Davies, their heads close together. He saw Davies give Daniel a small pouch of what looked like medicine. The test was cruel, but necessary. At our next meeting, I laid out a false plan. "We go tomorrow night," I said, watching Daniel's face. "The signal will be a bird call, a mockingbird at midnight." Daniel's relief was almost imperceptible, but I saw it. The next night, Marcus and I hid in the woods near the spot I had mentioned. Just before midnight, we saw two figures creeping through the trees, Davies and the new watchman, both armed. Daniel had betrayed us. The confrontation was heartbreaking. We cornered him in the early morning, away from the cabins. He broke down, tears streaming down his face. He confessed everything, pulling the pouch of medicine from his pocket. "For Esther," he sobbed. "I couldn't let her die. What would you do? What is a man to do?" There was no easy answer. Was his betrayal born of malice or of love? Was his choice unforgivable, or was it the desperate act of a man caught in an impossible trap? Marcus wanted to kill him. "He would have sent us to our deaths," he snarled, but I saw my own dilemma in Daniel's eyes. The choice to leave my own family behind, the choice he had made to save his. They were two sides of the same cursed coin. "We don't kill him," I said, my voice heavy. "We leave him. He has to live with what he's done. That is his punishment." The betrayal forced us to change everything. Our escape was now or never, before Daniel could reveal our true plan. The final preparations were a blur of frantic, silent activity. The time for strategy was over. Now was the time for desperation and faith. The final goodbye was the hardest thing I have ever done. I went to my mother. I didn't need to say a word. She knew. She pulled me into her arms, her embrace fierce. "Take the ocean stone," she whispered. "Let it guide you to the water that will wash you clean. Don't you worry about us. Your freedom will be our strength." I then found Amara near the washing house. I couldn't tell her I was leaving. The risk was too great. I just hugged her, holding on for a moment too long. "Be strong, little sister," I murmured. "Sing your songs, even if it's just in your heart." She looked at me, her eyes full of confusion and a dawning fear. Turning away from her, from my mother, from the only home I had ever known, felt like tearing a part of my own body off. The great escape was upon us, but it felt less like a glorious revolt and more like a funeral. There was no moon, no drum, no grand signal. Our second escape began with a silent nod in the suffocating darkness. It was just the four of us, Marcus, Sarah, James, and me. The betrayal had stripped our plan down to its barest bones. Run, run fast, and don't look back. We carried nothing but the clothes on our backs, a small pouch of dried meat Sarah had saved, and the heavy weight of the lives we were leaving behind. We moved like smoke through the familiar paths of the plantation, my internal song map guiding our every step. The rhythm in my head was frantic now, a racing heartbeat. Past the silent cabins, past the stable where Miller, the old watchman, snored his predictable tune, and toward the lightning-scarred oak that marked the edge of our world. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of pure terror through me. I kept expecting to hear the baying of dogs, the shout of a patrol. Davies would be furious about the false information from Daniel. He would be on high alert. We made it to the woods, the dense canopy swallowing us whole. The darkness was absolute, a physical presence we had to push through. This was where my knowledge paid off. I navigated not by sight, but by feel and sound. The texture of bark on a particular tree, the soft squelch of a patch of marshy ground, the way the wind whispered through a grove of pines, these were my signposts. I used my skills to communicate, not with loud drumzitcher, but with the subtle music of the forest itself. A snap twig in a specific two-beat rhythm meant stop. A low whistle mimicking a nightjar meant all clear. We moved for what felt like hours, a desperate, lung-bursting trek. We reached the shallow point in the creek, the water shockingly cold as it rushed over our ankles. As we emerged on the other side, shivering and soaked, we heard it, the sound we had been dreading, the distant, chilling bay of hounds. They had found our trail. "They're on us!" Marcus hissed, his eyes wide in the gloom. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm me. Running blindly would get us caught. We needed a plan. My mind raced, grabbing for any piece of knowledge, any trick I had ever heard. I remembered old Samuel telling me how to confuse dogs, running water and strong scents. "This way," I commanded, changing our direction. "To the swine farm." It was a gamble. A small, independent farm owned by a poor white family lay a mile to the east. They were not friends, but they kept a large pen of pigs, and the stench was overpowering. We ran, the barking getting closer, the sounds of men on horseback crashing through the undergrowth behind us. The air grew thick with the foul odor of the pigs. We found the pen, a large, muddy enclosure. Without hesitating, I slid under the fence and waded into the muck, the others right behind me. We submerged ourselves as much as we could, the thick, foul-smelling mud sucking at our clothes. We heard them arrive. Davies's voice, raw with fury, cut through the night. "They came this way. The dogs have the scent." The hounds were going mad, barking and whining, confused by the overwhelming smell of the pigs and the mud. We held our breath, our hearts pounding a deafening rhythm against our ribs. I could see the light of their lanterns, moving back and forth, casting long, dancing shadows. It was an eternity of terror, buried in filth, listening to our hunters just feet away. "Damn it! They've lost the scent!" Davies roared in frustration. "They must have stayed in the creek. Spread out. Find them!" The lights moved away. The sounds of the pursuit faded into the distance. We waited, not daring to move, until the only sounds were the grunting of the pigs and our own ragged breaths. We had done it. We had used their own world, their own landscape against them. My knowledge had saved us. Help came, as promised, but not in the way we expected. As we stumbled out of the pig pen, covered in filth and shivering, a figure emerged from the shadows of the nearby farmhouse. It was a woman holding a rifle. We froze, certain we were caught, but she didn't raise the gun. She just looked at us, her face tired and grim. "My husband's out with them," she said, her voice a low whisper. "He's a fool, but he needs the money. The Quaker, Penn, he paid me more. There's a wagon with a false bottom full of hay waiting in my barn. Get in, now." The shock of it left us speechless. This woman, the wife of one of our pursuers, was our unexpected angel. We didn't ask questions. We scrambled into the barn and concealed ourselves in the cramped, suffocating space of the wagon. The emotional climax of our escape wasn't a grand battle or a heroic stand. It was the simple, terrifying act of placing our lives in the hands of a stranger. The creak of the wagon wheels on the dirt road, the only sound, each rotation taking us further from the hell we knew and deeper into an uncertain freedom. The grand night revolt had failed, but this small, desperate flight, aided by an unlikely ally, felt like a victory greater than I could ever have imagined. The dream of freeing 50 freed slaves, the Kurt, was still alive, but I knew now it would not happen in one night. It would happen one soul at a time. The journey north was not a single continuous flight, but a series of terrifying leaps into the dark, punctuated by periods of claustrophobic waiting. The Underground Railroad was not a train, it was a whisper network, a chain of human trust stretched taut over hundreds of miles. Our first station was the hay wagon. We lay in the suffocating darkness for what felt like days, the smell of hay and horse sweat thick in our nostrils, listening to the muffled sounds of the world outside. The farmer's wife dropped us at a pre-arranged spot, a dense wood on the outskirts of a small town, with a parcel of bread and cheese and a final whispered instruction. Follow the creek north until you see a barn with a blue star painted on the door. Knock 3 times. Wait. Mr. Penn, the Quaker, met us there. His face was grave, but his eyes were kind. "The Lord has delivered you this far," he said, his voice calm and steady. "But the journey ahead is perilous. You will travel by night. You will hide by day. You will trust no one but those I send you to." His barn was our sanctuary for 2 days. We washed in a horse trough, the cold water a baptism, cleansing us of the pig farm's filth and the plantation's grime. We ate hot food for the first time since the escape and slept on clean straw, a luxury so profound it felt like a dream. From there, we were passed from one conductor to the next. Each station was different, a testament to the courage and diversity of the abolitionist movement. We hid in the secret cellar of a German farmer who spoke barely any English, but communicated with warm smiles and plates of steaming potatoes. We spent a terrifying day in the attic of a free black family in Baltimore, holding our breath as city guards passed by on the street below. The father of that family, a barber named Thomas, looked at me and said, "Everyone we get through is a victory. Every soul is a battle won." His words echoed the shift in my own understanding. The singular Tower Night Revolt was a young man's dream. This slow, painstaking work was the reality of liberation. The dangers were constant. The Fugitive Slave Act meant that even in a free state like Pennsylvania, we were not safe. Bounty hunters, men who made their living from human misery, were everywhere. They were called patrollers or paddy rollers in our slang, and their reputation was fearsome. One night, as we crossed a rickety wooden bridge over a wide river, we saw the glow of lanterns ahead. 2 men blocking the path. Bounty hunters. Our conductor, a wiry, fast-thinking man named Silas, grabbed us. "Into the water! Now," he hissed. We slid down the muddy bank and into the cold, dark river, clinging to the wooden pilings of the bridge as the bounty hunters' boots stomped on the planks just above our heads. We heard their coarse laughter, their talk of the price on a runaway's head. I pressed my face against the rough, mossy wood, the river's current pulling at my legs, certain we would be discovered. I clutched the ocean stone my mother had given me, its smoothness a small point of calm in a world of terror. After what felt like an hour, they moved on. We crawled out of the river, soaked and shivering, but alive. The close call left us shaken, a stark reminder that the line between freedom and bondage was as thin as a shadow. My first true experience of freedom came in Philadelphia. It was a city bigger than anything I had ever imagined, loud and bustling. For the first time in my life, I walked down a street and no one ordered me to get out of the way. I could look a white person in the eye without fear of immediate reprisal. I saw black men and women running their own shops, driving their own wagons, speaking with an air of confidence I had never witnessed. It was intoxicating and disorienting, but the freedom was incomplete. The reality of racism in the North was not the overt brutality of the plantation, but a more insidious, chilling prejudice. We were free, but we were not equal. We were met with suspicion. Doors were closed to us. We were offered the lowest-paying jobs. I saw the same look of disdain in some northern eyes that I had seen in Master Bennett's. It was a sobering realization. Escaping the plantation was only the first step. The true North, the promised land of true equality, was still further away. Canada, that was the only place we would be truly safe, beyond the reach of the bounty hunters and the fugitive slave law. We had escaped the physical chains, but the invisible chains of prejudice extended far beyond the Mason-Dixon line. The journey wasn't over. We were still running. We just had a little more room to breathe. And maybe, for the first time, I could imagine a day when I wouldn't need to use forbidden drums to communicate in secret, or dream of a way to have 50 freed slaves, because they would already be free. Crossing the border from Niagara Falls, New York, into St. Catharines, Canada, was the quietest, most profound moment of my life. There was no thunderous applause, no grand ceremony. There was just the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other, stepping from a land where the law declared me property to a land where the law declared me a man. I stood on the Canadian side and breathed. The air felt different. It was cold and crisp, but it was the air of freedom, and it filled my lungs with a lightness I had never known. The crushing weight I had carried on my shoulders my entire life, the constant, low-grade terror, simply lifted. I wept, not for sorrow, but for a joy so immense it was painful. Marcus, Sarah, and James were beside me, and we held on to each other, 4 souls who had walked through the valley of the shadow of death and emerged into the light. Building a new life was not easy. We arrived with nothing, but we had something more valuable than money. We had our freedom and the will to work. I found a job on the docks, my muscles, honed by years of labor in the tobacco fields, serving me well. Marcus became a blacksmith, his skills, once used for secret sabotage, now earning him a respectable living. Sarah and James started a small laundry service. For the first time, our labor was our own. The money we earned, no matter how little, was ours to keep. I never forgot the promise I made to myself, the promise I felt I owed to my mother, my sister, and to the 50 souls who ran with me on that first terrible night. As soon as I had saved enough, I sought out the abolitionist network in St. Catharines. It was a hub of activity, a community of formerly enslaved people, Quakers and other allies, all dedicated to the cause. They were led by the formidable Harriet Tubman herself, who had made the city her base of operations. Meeting her was like meeting a figure from a legend. She was a small woman, weathered by hardship, but her eyes held a fire that could burn down the whole institution of slavery. I told her my story. I told her about our failed night revolt, about the betrayal, about our escape, and I told her about my skill, the song map, and the rhythmic codes of the dark drums. Her eyes lit up when I spoke of the rhythms. "The masters have their books and their maps," she said, her voice raspy but powerful. "We must use the knowledge they cannot understand, the knowledge we carry inside us." She saw the value in my system. My skill, once a secret act of cultural preservation and a tool for a small escape, was about to become part of a larger war. I became a conductor on the Underground Railroad, but I didn't guide people from the South. My role was different. I was a station master on the Canadian side. My job was to meet the new arrivals, the terrified, exhausted, and disoriented souls who stumbled across the border, just as I had. I would help them find housing, find work, and navigate their new lives. But more than that, I would interview them. I would listen to their stories of the routes they took, the dangers they faced, the people who helped them. My memory for rhythm and pattern was now used to create a new kind of map. I converted their oral histories into a complex tapestry of rhythmic codes and song maps. A certain beat sequence would represent a safe house in Ohio. A change in tempo would indicate a dangerous river crossing patrolled by bounty hunters. These song maps were shared with conductors heading south. They were a living, breathing intelligence network, a way of transmitting vital, life-saving information that could not be intercepted or understood by our enemies. I had once dreamed of having 50 freed slaves out in one night. Now my work was helping to guide hundreds to freedom, one perilous journey at a time. Years passed. I learned to read and write fluently. I married Sarah, whose quiet strength had been my anchor. We built a home. We had children who were born free, children who would never know the sting of a lash or the terror of the auction block. I never saw my mother or Amara again. The news that trickled back from the south was scarce and unreliable. I heard that Master Bennett had sold the plantation after the war, and the people there were scattered. I can only pray they found their own path to freedom in the chaos of emancipation. The not knowing is a wound that never fully healed. My legacy is not written in history books. It lives in the quiet rhythms of freedom. It's in the generations that came after me, who were born into a world where they could sing any song they wished. My journey began with a secret drumbeat, a father's memory of Africa. It became a language of resistance, a map to liberation, and finally, a tool to build a new world. The heart drum my father gave me is still beating. It beats in the stories we tell, in the courage we pass down, in the relentless pursuit of justice for all. My story is just one of thousands, a single note in the grand, defiant song of resistance. Now, I ask you to listen to the rhythms of your own family's past. What stories of resistance, survival, and courage are waiting to be shared? Share them, keep them alive. For in these stories we find the truest measure of our strength.